All right, today on The Explainer, we're diving into something really interesting. It's a discourse from 1987 by Supreme Master Ching Hai. And in it, she talks about a spiritual practice she calls the Supreme Method. So, what is this method? What isn't it? And what's the big paradox at the heart of it all? Let's unpack the claims from this source. Wow, okay. So, right out of the gate, the source makes this incredibly bold claim. It's not just saying the Quan Yin method is, a good method. No, it's the best, the supreme method. That's a huge statement, right? And it really sets up the big question for us today. What exactly is this method? And according to this discourse, what makes it so supreme?
So, the first thing the source does is clarify that this so-called supreme method isn't some brand new thing. Actually, it's framed as this one single teaching that's been around forever, showing up in famous scriptures, but, and this is the key part, with a bunch of different labels.
So check this out. The discourse links this method directly to some really well-known Buddhist scriptures. You can see it here. It argues that when you read about the lotus flower method or the diamond method, the Buddha wasn't talking about separate things at all. The claim is these were all just different names for the exact same practice. He was just, tailoring the label for different audiences. And according to the source, that's where a lot of the confusion starts. People thinking these are all different methods when they're not. Okay, so you're probably thinking, great, it's in the sutras, I'll just go read them and learn it, right? Well, not so fast. This is where the discourse drops a real paradox on us. It says, yes, the method is mentioned in the books, but you can't actually learn it from the books.
And this gets to a really critical distinction the source makes: the difference between a record and a transmission. Think of it like this. The scriptures are a map, a really, really good map. They tell you about the destination, describe the scenery, what past travelers saw and felt. But, and this is a big but, reading the map is not the same as actually making the journey, right? The source claims the real method is something that's transmitted outside the teachings. It's not in the ink.
To really drive this home, the discourse uses a great analogy from Journey to the West. So we all know the story, right? We can read all about the monk Xuanzang's epic, dangerous quest to India. We can follow all his adventures and feel his relief when he finally gets the scriptures. But reading that story doesn't put the actual scriptures in your hands, does it? And it definitely doesn't mean you've gone through the journey yourself. You're just an observer imagining it. All right, so if you can't learn it from a book, what's next? What about all those other common spiritual practices we hear about? Well, this is a big part of the discourse, basically myth-busting. It spends a lot of time clarifying what this Quan Yin method is not by taking on some pretty popular ideas.
Let's take an example. Someone might hear about this inner sound and think, oh, I get it, and they head to the beach to meditate on the sound of the ocean waves. Makes sense, right? A constant, natural sound.
Well, according to the discourse, that's a dead end. It's directly refuted. The source argues that this kind of idea is just a product of what it calls the limited profane mind. In other words, it's just your brain coming up with a nice idea and interpretation. It's not the real deal.
Okay, fine. What about something more traditional, something lots of people do? Is the method just chanting, repeating a bodhisattva's name or a mantra over and over?
And again, the answer from the source is a firm no. And the logic is exactly the same. If it's something you can generate, something that comes from your own brain and your own mouth, it's still stuck in that limited realm. It's not the transcendent method it's talking about.
All right, last one. What about something more abstract, more internal? Is the practice about sitting quietly and trying to visualize or feel boundless compassion for everyone?
And this really gets to the heart of why the discourse refutes all these common practices. It comes down to this idea of the limited mind. The source basically asks, how can our finite, limited human brain possibly create or imagine something that's infinite? How can you conceive of boundless compassion? The source says you can't. It's like trying to pour the entire ocean into a teacup. It's just not going to work. Now, according to the source, doing these other practices isn't just, a waste of time. It claims they can actually be harmful, leading to a really big spiritual problem. And that problem is described as the trap of the ego. Just look at the contrast the source draws here. It suggests that maybe before you start, you have some humility. But after doing what it calls the incorrect practice, the ego, the kaita, gets huge. Everything becomes about I. I practice. I am so great. I know everything. You see the shift? It's all about self-aggrandizement.
And that's the danger, according to this text. This massive ego acts like a brick wall. It fills up your whole mind, leaving zero room for anything new to get in, not even a tiny crack of light. You basically become unteachable because you're so convinced you've already got it all figured out.
And to really hammer this point home, the Discourse uses this fantastic, kind of funny quote. It says, "If just reciting scriptures without understanding did any good, a tape recorder would have become a Buddha by now." I mean, you can't argue with that logic, can you? Okay, so let's recap. We've gone through what the source says this method isn't. It's not something you can read in a book. It's not chanting. It's not visualizing. Which brings us back to the core and to the most mysterious part of the whole thing, the actual nature of this Quanian method. So here are the key takeaways from the Discourse. First, the real method is supposed to go way beyond our intellect or imagination. Second, you can't learn it from a book, and you can't create it yourself through chanting or anything like that. Third, its whole point is to reduce the ego, not make it bigger. And finally, and this is the big one, the source claims it has to be received through a direct, unspoken transmission. And that leaves us right here with a final, really provocative question that sits at the very heart of this discourse. If a teaching can't be written down, can't be spoken, can't even really be described, then how in the world can it be transmitted from one person to another? That's the mystery that this source material leaves us with.